Hey guys, a new episode of The Acolyte is out, and what do you know, I really liked it. Who would have thought that a bunch of lightsabers got me interested? And anyways, moving into the video. Spoilers, of course, for the episode, I forgot to say that. So if you saw my last video about The Acolyte, you'll know that I do have a lot of problems with the show. I did really enjoy the latest episode, so I do just want to clarify that that doesn't mean that I'm suddenly okay with all of the faults that I have with the show. I do think that I still have a lot of criticisms. However, the latest episode did get me really excited for the next episode, which I had not been feeling up to this point. I'm very grateful for that. I am excited for another episode of a Star Wars show, and that feels good. So props to them for that. I did see a lot of people saying things like, how can you think this show is bad with an episode like this? I just want to point out that I don't think that one good episode of a show suddenly negates like 4 episodes of issues. I do think that there are a lot of writing and pacing and editing issues that I went through on my last video. I don't think that those are just magically gone, but I do want to talk about some of the positives that I saw in this latest episode. First off, and I really want to make sure that I'm pronouncing this correctly, I may be wrong, but Manny Jacinto absolutely killed it as Kamir, otherwise known as the Stranger. I mean, he just did an incredible job. The choreography of this episode was insane. It was really cool to see Jackie fight with 2 lightsabers. I saw somebody point out that it's kind of like what Ahsoka would have looked like in live action, which is a really cool thought. I really like that they're leaning into these unnatural, sort of uncanny valley movements for this villain. I think it feels very eerie, and I think it's a great narrative instinct to lean into, and I just adore it. I think that even him gliding down into frame in the previous episode was a great little tease, but actually seeing his twitching motions, he feels like a sort of demonic phantom. It's just a really cool vibe that they're going for, so I really appreciated that. I'm surprised by how excited I am for this new villain, and of course when I'm really excited about something, I start to theorize. Now, he was confirmed to be a new Sith Lord, however, Manny was also literally lying in interviews.
Did you actually get to hold a lightsaber or did you wish you had?
Yeah, no, I definitely have lightsaber envy.
So I'm not really sure what we can trust or believe there, but they did make a distinction in the dialogue that he is what the Jedi would consider to be a Sith. It's possible that he was just using that as an explanation because that is the closest thing that the Jedi could understand. I quickly just want to discuss what the Jedi might be thinking at this moment. At this point, the Sith have been considered to be extinct. Contrary to so-called popular belief, that doesn't really mean that they weren't around, obviously. Plagueis and Palpatine didn't just appear randomly. There was always a rule of 2 keeping the Sith Order alive and hiding in the shadows. But what I find interesting are this guy's motivations. If the Sith are desperately hiding in the shadows and metaphorically living off scraps, why would one just randomly start attacking Jedi out in the open? What are his motives for teaching May, and why does Kylo Ren's theme play after he heals May?
What extraordinary beings we are.
My personal theory, and one that I have seen kind of circulating around, is that this is probably a precursor to the Knights of Ren. If you've only seen the movies, you know that the Knights of Ren are those guys in black that stand behind Kylo and get a little bit more action in The Rise of Skywalker. But what you might not know is that Kylo Ren was not the original leader of the Knights of Ren. The only other leader we know of before Kylo is a guy who literally just went by the name Ren, basically a leader of this sort of misfit crew of Darksiders who were supposedly Force sensitive and from the unknown regions. Luke and Kylo have an altercation with them when Ben Solo was younger, and that's how he knows of their existence and eventually chooses to join their ranks once he leaves Luke's Jedi Order. Some quick further details about these guys. They were beholden to their own belief system where they didn't belong to anybody, whether it be the Sith, the Jedi, the Empire, whatever the law was at that time. basically they did whatever suited them, and as it turns out, the name of Rin actually passes down with his lightsaber. So this iteration of Rin that we know actually isn't the first Rin, which is really interesting. At least that was our understanding until we learned that they were kind of serving Sidious. They would serve the occasional villain if it suited their purposes, so maybe they weren't like Sith specifically, but either way, they weren't dead on Sith. Their motivations are still pretty muddled, and so are their origins, and I think that's what makes them so intriguing as a group. They were introduced in Charles Soule's Kylo Ren comic, and their leader Ren bore scars on his arms and torso, wore a flat, mysterious mask, and he also wielded a red lightsaber. Kylo, once he became a member of the Knights of Ren, of course bears a similarly plain and dark mask. The process of designing Kylo's mask for The Force Awakens was really just to make it look subconsciously like Darth Vader's mask in design. But I do think, as another Twitter user mentioned, it's fun to think that there's an in-universe reason that the Knights of Ren all kind of have these similar masks. I just think it's fun to think that these designs in these masks appear similar as some sort of design language between the Knights of Ren themselves or the Sith. Like there's some sort of in-universe design language that then carries out to later followers, which I think is pretty cool. The musical cue following Kamir's actions, especially when paired with force healing, which of course we really only know because of The Rise of Skywalker, seems to suggest that this is some sort of heritage or connection to the Knights of Ren. Now, at the time of the Acolyte, it wouldn't really make sense for Kamir himself to be the Ren that we know from the comics. There's like a 140-ish year difference between the Acolyte and the time that Kylo was born, let alone the 30 years from there to The Force Awakens. But I do think that they're suggesting there's some sort of connection with the Knights of Ren here. Leslie Headland had an interesting take on the reveal for Kamir, stating how it doesn't really matter if we could see it coming or not. I gotta say, I did find it kind of eye-rollingly predictable that he was gonna be the villain, but once he was on screen acting as the villain, I didn't care anymore because his performance was so engaging and he was so mysterious, and all of the other factors that went into the character I was way more interested in. At one point he has like a really scary line that I thought was a great introduction.
Chuck. Was that its name?
It was kind of really chilling hearing him use his goofy Kamir voice after just slaughtering so many Jedi.
Hello.
I was more invested in the character at that point.
She was a child.
You brought her here.
So I'm not really sure if I agree with the method that they used for leading up to his character, but I guess I can't argue with the results. However, again, I do think this shouldn't just make up for the other flaws of the show in the previous 4 episodes. I think that if those episodes were structured better, this episode would have hit even harder, but my goodness, it did hit. I really did not think they had it in them to kill Jackie or Yord like that, so it really shocked me. Props to them on that. It really got me. Like, I gasped audibly. Rest in peace to the Yord Horde. Rest in peace. I did see a lot of people say that the lightsaber fight is the best that we've seen since The Phantom Menace. I don't want to just leave Revenge of the Sith out of that conversation. I know that there are differing opinions on how long-winded that battle can be, but I do think it's really well choreographed overall. I even like the lightsaber battle in The Force Awakens, but I will say whoever is coordinating the fights and whoever directed this episode for The Acolyte, they are just knocking it out of the park. The action in the show is definitely its highlight, and they're just really killing it. I do still have problems with the writing. I think a lot of the dialogue just feels like what a kid would think sounds menacing for a villain to say. The whole episode, though, was mostly action, and since this show really strives off of that, the episode felt like a blast. It did really resemble a lot of those earlier Old Republic animations, which the fight scenes and the choreography in those are just amazing. In the Star Wars community these days, I know some people take issue with those because it's harbored a lot of ill will towards lightsaber battles ever since. I think the key difference is what makes lightsaber battles so engaging to begin with is that it's really dependent on how much you care about the characters and the stakes. The choreography in this episode was really great. Really, the only reason that I cared was because I was really interested in this new villain character. I was interested in Soul's character, in Jackie and Yord. I kinda care about Osha. I really don't care about May, and that's primarily due to the writing in the previous episode. Felt out of character. It's hard for me to connect with her. But I do think they made a really compelling villain, and I also just know that Soul has something to do with May and Osha's backstory and the death of their witch coven. I think seeing that unveiled will mean a big fallout for Soul. I think he's hiding a lot of secrets, but he obviously still cares about Osha. So he's kind of in a very interesting position here because he has a lot of secrets and he really cares about Osha, but this villain is killing off his friends and threatening to bring everything into the limelight, and I just think that's a really interesting situation to see this specific character process and go through. I just think they're doing a good job with his character. I like Soul. So I'm really interested to see the fallout from his actions. And real quick, I want to talk about Cortosis. I think it's so cool that they brought this into canon. So if you don't know what Cortosis is, Cortosis was a really rare kind of metal that could not only withstand lightsaber blades, but could also short them out for a limited amount of time. It was originally part of Legends. They brought it into canon in the novel A New Dawn by John Jackson Miller, which was actually the very first news story told in canon since Disney acquired Star Wars in 2012. The book released in 2014, I believe. After that, Cortosis was used heavily in Thrawn alliances and has since been brought up in the comics as well. So I've got a quote from Thrawn himself. The material is called Cortosis. It's very rare. I've heard stories about it, but never seen any. It's rumored to have unusually high energy absorption and transmission coefficients to the point where many energy weapons blasts will be dissipated along the fibers without damaging the fibers themselves. However, Cortosis was very brittle, so if you tried to make armor out of it or if you kept striking it over and over again, it would eventually break, which, funny enough, that's what we see happen with the Stranger's Mask. An ancient faction called the Ascendancy once made a blade out of Cortosis, but upon the Ascendancy's defeat, it was lost to time until discovered in the Dr. Aphra comics, well after the time of the Jedi. And to my understanding, it was really difficult to make armor out of Cortosis until Count Dooku's scientists discovered a way to successfully accomplish this, as seen in Thrawn alliances. It seems like Chimera's character was able to do this, but considering how rare Cortosis is, there is an in-canon reason as to why we don't see this. It's not very often that you would find this ever. I was pretty proud of myself because I did clock it very quickly. My roommates were like, "What is he doing?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I think it's Cortosis." It's just really fun that they included something so obscure into the episode. I just think that was a really cool idea. Real quick, I just want to tack on at the end here. I keep seeing people talk about this, asking why everything in Star Wars doesn't just use Cortosis. I think all the lore that I just read kind of makes it clear that it's very rare, but I actually just started reading the first of the Darth Bane trilogy, which takes place 1,000 years before the Phantom Menace, and literally the first chapter talks about Cortosis, and they say that it's used in all of the Republic's armor, its weapons, and its ships and everything. The Sith use it too. I just feel like it's not that much of a stretch to imagine that Cortosis is just super, super rare. I saw somebody be like, why didn't the Separatists use it? They could definitely afford it. And it's yeah, they could probably afford it if they found it. Like I say in this video, they did find some Cortosis, but I don't think they had enough to just mass produce it. It's really not that hard to just do the legwork of imagining why we haven't seen this before. And also, this is one episode in the show. We haven't even seen the rest of this show. I don't think they're just gonna sit down and explain why we don't see Cortosis all the time. That's not what this scene is for. Whatever, anyways. Anyways, Chimera also has this really cool way of slipping out his lightsaber from the larger hilt. The moment that Jackie has where she pulls out her lightsaber, it was really cool, just the little glimpse that she does. That was a moment where I was was like, yes, like we are in Star Wars right now. This felt right. So I just think they did an amazing job with that little moment with Jackie. Really the whole scene from there leading up to Yord's death as well. Just really well done. The fact that they stabbed her with 3 stab wounds, so there's like no way that she could have survived. And kind of the same with Yord. It's like, I don't think there's any coming back from having your neck snapped and then left on the forest floor for that long. And granted, this is kind of doing a lot of what I mentioned in my last video about showing why the bad guy is bad versus just telling us. However, structurally, I just feel like the first 4 episodes could have done a better way of doing that leading up to this moment. But anyways, I did see people complain that Jackie was training at the beginning of the episode or in an earlier episode, and then all of a sudden she was fighting a Sith Lord. And it's like, yeah, they're Jedi. They don't just train once and then like never have to train again. That's not how life works. Life isn't like a video game. You don't train really hard and then level up and never have to use those muscles the same again. Like, athletes have to train constantly in order to keep up their peak physical performance. And so yeah, of course, like a Jedi would need to train over and over again. This wasn't Jackie's first time holding a training stick. She obviously knows what she's doing, but you have to go through those motions to practice. So anyways, I don't know, people just like to complain. Another thing, people were complaining about May cutting her hair. If you've seen anything with samurai, you know that they cut their hair with a blade. Padawans get their Padawan braid cut off during their knighting ceremony, like that's been in Star Wars for a while. I do, however, think that this scene is maybe shot a little goofily, like the framing of the camera could have been a little better, the blocking could have made it interesting. It does look kind of goofy as is, because she's just standing in a prone position, very dramatically, like goes up like that. I just think you could have handled that a little more serenely and seriously, and it wouldn't have felt so goofy. Again, I think that that's what people want to get at, but they don't really know how to vocalize it. But the concept itself, I don't have any issues with. Like, it's symbolic. It means that you're cutting off a former part of yourself, and that's been a thing in fiction for a while now, so nothing new here. Anyways, my real question at the end, I'm just excited to find out more about the stranger or Kamir's backstory. I want to know his motivations. My question is he the master or is he the apprentice? Since we know the Rule 2 exists, it would certainly seem to imply that there could be another big bad guy. Is it necessarily a Sith villain that we know of before? Like, is it Plagueis? Maybe not. I would be excited to see a new Sith. But I do think it's really interesting that this Sith character would be so blasé about showing himself to the Jedi. I know that Darth Maul in the comics really wanted to kill Jedi, and Sidious had to hold him back so that he wouldn't ruin the plan. It just doesn't really feel like a good moment for the Sith to reveal themselves. Him saying, oh, I'm just in this for myself, I want to be free, kind of feels like something that a rebellious apprentice would say. So I'm really curious if there is actually a worse villain than him. I would love to see that. I'm kind of afraid that the Acolyte won't get a second season, and if that's the case, then we might be in for a pretty disappointing season 1 cliffhanger revealing this new bad guy that we might not be able to see again in live action, which is kind of why I was really scared about the first 4 episodes not really being like top of the line content, because I really don't know how many people are going to stick around. Hopefully this episode is a sign of an upward trend in the Acolyte for the rest of the series. I hope that's the case, but is it too little too late is the question that I have. But either way, really excited. Rest in peace to the Yord Horde. My heart goes out to you guys. I'm very interested to see how this all wraps up, so thank you guys for watching, and goodbye.